afternoon, everyone. It is September 23rd, 2019. Actually, it's the 29th. I almost said 23rd. I did say 23rd. It's actually the 29th. Today, as you know from the title of this video, we are testing two Beyers, the 1990 Pro and the T1 2nd Gen. Why? Well, because people have been asking. And number two, because I think that these two headphones have different tonalities. And this is basically two styles that Beyerdynamic is presenting to you. Which one do you prefer? Do you prefer the more, quote, analytical style of the 1990, or do you prefer the more, quote, relaxed style of the T1? At least that's the idea that Beyerdynamic wants to give you. Now, if you go to the Beyerdynamic website for the 1990, you can see that this is, again, priced at $600, and they said this is the Tesla Studio Reference Headphone for mixing and mastering. And, you know, we have tested the 1990 ad nauseum, and I have already made a conclusion regarding the 1990, more or less, which is that it's a good headphone, not worth $600 by any stretch of the imagination. And on top of that, it doesn't do anything excellently. In other words, it's a mediocre headphone. It does good. It's good. It's not excellent. It's not fantastic. It doesn't have amazing soundstage. It doesn't have amazing detail retrieval. It's not neutral. It doesn't wow somebody if they have a lot of other headphone choices. And indeed, at $600, you have a lot of other headphone choices. But this is what people talk about. This and the 1770 godforsaken headphone. The T1, on the other hand, is a different type of headphone. This is 600 ohms, and that's really pushing it, right? I mean, in order to get the T1, you will also need to get an amplifier that can drive the T1. The T1 is not easily driven off your phone, nor is it easily driven off just one of those cheap FIO amplifiers, you know, the cheapest one. It's not really going to give you justice, because the thing with the T1, as we've done with previous tests, is that the T1 really does come to life once the driver has more power in it. If you don't put more power into the T1, if you don't keep cranking up the volume, then the driver simply kind of sounds lazy, which it isn't, because it's 600 ohms, and you really have to drive it in order to get all of that nice, juicy texture and sound character out of the headphone. Now, Beyerdynamic does not tell you the price of the T1, and I don't know if this headphone is now discontinued or not. It's still available on their website, but it doesn't show the price. The 1990 does have a price, but for the T1, you have to contact them. Well, you can still get the T1 from other websites. You can get it from eBay and all that. Focus Camera, which is a decent website, sells a T1 for $900, and I think that really is the MSRP. Why Beyer doesn't share it on their website is beyond me. All right, so let's just get to the test. Today we're testing the bass, and we are using our standard test playlist. Hey, now we have 35 followers. Excellent. On the standard playlist, we are going to test the Mountains by Hans Zimmer, Angel by Massive Attack, and Drum Solo by Jack Bruce and Simon Phillips. I have both headphones plugged into an A-B switch. Number 1, or A, is the T1. B is going to be the 1990. The headphones are plugged into the RME ADI2 DAC, which is an excellent DAC. And it's currently in high gain mode, so that we can actually drive the 600s, not the 600, but the T1 at 600 ohms. Let's get to it, shall we? Here we go. So currently we are at negative 22 decibels on the T1. It's audible. Now we're at negative 14, and that's a little bit more comfortable volume. I can definitely hear myself talking, but the music is also at a reasonable volume. You can hear that low rumbliness to the bass, but it's not overwhelming. I'm going to increase the volume again. Now we're at negative 6. And at negative 6, the driver is starting to come alive, and that low rumbliness has a bit more linger to it. The sound is fairly warm sounding. So in other words, there's no peakiness. I mean, there's not supposed to be at this portion of the song. And it's fairly relaxed, meaning you're not getting a whole lot of energy out of the rumble. You're not getting a whole lot of energy with the clickety-clackety instruments. And I'm going to skip ahead to midway when the crescendo hits. And at this point, we should have the organ and everything playing just about now. As all the instruments ramp up in volume, it's a really pleasant sound. There's no harshness, no peakiness, no ear-piercing treble energy. There's very good soundstage, so it's left and right and a little bit behind my ear. At least that's what it feels like, that the sound is actually not only left and right, but also behind my ear, coming from behind me, and also from in front of me, just slightly. That rumble is a little loose, however. I'm going to say it's not tight, the reverberation lingers, but it doesn't sound as if there's a lot of detail or definition there. Indeed, when the rumble comes in, and that rumble really is from the organ, it's really loosey-goosey sort of, because it starts interfering with the other instruments, the treble energy, the mids. That rumble just kind of, you feel as if it's bumping up against all those other frequencies. And the reason it's doing that is because it's not tight. It's by no means a tight bass response on this song. And you start feeling and hearing that there is a little bit of distortion. Let's go back just a little bit to where the crescendo hits. We are at 1 minute and 55 seconds. Let's start again. Volume is at -5 now. So the ear cup has a little bit of reverberation, just slightly, as the organ comes in. But you lose some of that detail in the other instruments as the organ is playing. Not a whole lot of separation in the other instruments. Indeed, I cannot tell if there's multiple instruments. I could hear the rumbly organ, and I could hear some sort of brass instrument playing. But it simply doesn't have the type of definition that we've heard from other headphones that actually do produce a whole lot of separation and a whole lot of detail retrieval. The T1 really isn't that type of headphone on this song. It sounds good, it sounds relaxing. I mean, it's not ear-piercing even at -5 decibels, which is really nice because there are portions of this song, especially midway, that if you have it at extremely high volumes, there's a bit of treble energy that can get hurtful to some people. To me, -20, -5, it doesn't matter. The treble energy is very well controlled. And in fact, I would say it's basically rolled off. So the ear pierciness is something you're not probably going to have to worry about as long as you're listening to a song like Mountains. But let's switch to the 1990. Okay, we have the 1990 on our heads. The sound isolation is practically the same between these two. I don't hear any difference from my environment. They're both, well, the 1990 is semi-open. It's not open back. Beyerdynamic is not completely accurate about that. The T1 has this really fine grill on it. It is open back. It is, I would say it's more open back than the 1990 is. All right, so let's start again. We are on the 1990. Let's go with Mountains again. Volume is currently at -25. I'm going to increase to -15. And at -15, this is what I think -10, -5 basically sounded like on the T1. I'm going to increase a little bit more to -10 now. That rumble is not particularly pronounced. I mean, I hear it, but there's no real reverberation to it. So whereas the T1 presented that rumble with some looseness, it kept rumbling, the 1990 is a bit more strict with that. So that rumble comes and goes fairly quickly. And it's not an elevated bass at all. When the rumbly drum comes in, it's very fast decay. I'm going to skip to halfway of the song when we have the crescendo. And here comes the crescendo. Yeah, much more treble energy in the 1990. That rumbly bass is much more controlled on the 1990 than on the T1. So I could actually hear the separation of instruments on the 1990 much better, noticeably better. I could hear multiple instruments, multiple string instruments and brass instruments. That rumbliness of the bass is immediately fades. It doesn't linger around or distort. The ear cup does have a slight reverberation in the ear cup, not to the extent as the T1. But I'm hearing a bit of distortion as to the bass, as if it's really odd. Let me stop. So there's one thing that I've noticed in the 1990 repeatedly, which is when there's a lot of air being moved due to some sort of bass, it kind of gets a distorted fan sensation, meaning like you put your face in front of a fan and you start talking into it, and you get the blah, 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 that sort of stuff. That's the type of character that I get, and I'm getting it right now on this headphone. So if I go back just a couple seconds here, when all the instruments are playing and that organ is playing, is pushing a lot of air, I'm hearing kind of like that sort of thing, where it just sounds distorted. It does not sound clear. It doesn't happen throughout the song. It's just when there's a lot of that air being pushed from that bass frequency. Let's try it again. We're at 2 minutes and 45 seconds. Yeah, right there. At 2 minutes and 52 seconds, I hear it, and then I hear it again a couple seconds later. It's just, it's weird. I don't know how to explain it. I didn't hear it on the T1, and it's only on a 1990 that I really found it. We've tested so many other headphones with this song, and the 1990 is just the one that has this weird quirk. The 1990 has a similar weird quirk with New Light by Kazuki. It does a similar thing there, and I don't know why it does that. It's just the way it's presenting the song. Okay, so now let us go to back to the T1. All right, now we have returned to the T1. We're going to Angel by Massive Attack. Here we go. You can immediately hear that rumble, and it's pretty loose sounding. The volume currently is -9, -10. You can hear the two layers of bass right now. There's that low rumbly bass, and then there's the drum. You can hear some sort of synthesized music, whatever it is. It's a digitized music. I don't know what to call it. It's a pretty loose bass response. So even though you hear the drum going tuck, dunk, like that, they're hitting the top of the drum head, it doesn't have a whole lot of energy to it. It rolled off a little bit in the treble energy. Good soundstage. In fact, I would say the soundstage is, it feels like it's around my ear. Like the sound is all the way around my ear. It's not directly into my ear and nowhere else. I feel as if there's sound is coming just a little bit ahead of me and just a little bit behind me. But there's not a whole lot of verticality. Although, of course, that could just be the song. The vocal seems clear. I don't hear any distortion from the bass in the vocal. But it's not up front either. It's almost like the bass is shoulder to shoulder with the vocal. No harshness, no peakiness. I'm going to skip ahead a little bit, go to midway of the song. The decay is not particularly fast with the drum. It's not a bass head rumble, but it's certainly not a tight bass response. And that tightness comes from the lack of tightness comes from the lack of control over the bass. So that decay is fairly slow. You know, you hit the drum and it takes a couple of, maybe it takes a second or longer for that bass to completely dissipate. Although I could hear the bass, I could hear the low rumbly bass, I could hear the drum, I could hear the electric guitar. So all three are fairly separated. The issue is there's no hardline separation. There's a bit of melding with the bass, the rumbly bass, with the drum, and then with the electric guitar frequency. Just a little bit. And that smooths everything out on the one hand, where nothing sounds harsh. Nothing sounds as if it's ear-piercing. Everything is just very, very smooth. But in conjunction with that, even though it's smooth, the flip side of the coin is that the headphone also presents this song, I wouldn't say muddied, but certainly not as clearly defined and separated amongst the separate instruments as you would expect from a mixing and mastering headphone. But of course, the T1 is not a mixing and mastering headphone. I don't think Beyerdynamic even says that on its website about the T1. Let's go to the 1990. All right, we got the 1990 on our heads, and let's start. I haven't changed the volume. So obviously it's a little loud. I'm going to bring this down to negative 18, negative 19. Just about the same volume as it was on the T1. The bass is a little bit, the rumble is a bit more defined, not by a whole lot, but just a little bit more. That rumble doesn't interfere as much with the drum. You can clearly hear the difference. The headphone is a bit more closed off than the T1. I would say the T1 has a wider soundstage, noticeably more. And the sound doesn't feel as if it's, behind me and in front of me. It just sounds more like directly into my ear, very horizontal. The decay seems to be just a little bit faster. Better, tighter control so that the reverberation doesn't keep lingering as it did with the T1. And in fact, I would say that the vocal is cleaner on the 1990 than on the T1, just a little bit. Yeah, so if you just sit there and you listen, the bass is better controlled. It's a little bit more muted than it was on the T1. And so because of that muted nature, just a slight bit, the vocal comes out ahead. It's not shoulder to shoulder of the bass that it was on the T1, just a bit ahead. And so it sounds cleaner and clearer to differentiate. Let's skip to midway of the song. I'm going to increase the volume to negative 18. And in just a second, we're going to hear the rumble, the drum, and the electric guitar. So far, not peaky yet, but I can feel that treble energy is present, and it wasn't present on the T1. I'm going to increase the volume to negative 10. Yeah, definitely, it could definitely get peaky. That guitar frequency is very energetic. The separation of the guitar, the drum, and the rumble is much better than 1990 than it is on the T1. And in fact, I hear layers of guitar, whereas on the T1 I only heard, one electric guitar. On the 1990, it feels as if there's maybe two. but there's definitely more separation with the instruments on the 1990 than there was on the T1. Where the T1, as I said, has a bit of a melding amongst all the frequencies, the 1990 has more separation. It's a bit more hardline separation with the 1990 compared to the T1. Also, the 1990 is harsher to the ear, to my ear at least, compared to the T1, where the T1 has a rolled off treble. The 1990, that treble spike is definitely present. It is there if you keep pushing. And I was at, what was it? I think I was negative 14 decibels just now. And it was really getting to my threshold. But much better separation of all the instruments on the 1990 than on the T1. In fact, if you're looking for a rumbly bass, and you're looking between these two, then the T1 on this song has more of a rumble, and the 1990 has less of that rumble, but better separation of the instruments. All right, so let's go to our last song. I have the T1s. Let's go to Drum Solo by Jack Bruce and Simon Phillips. Here we go. I'm going to increase the volume to negative 10. Negative 9. I can almost hear that boing boing sound as the top of the drum is hit, so the air is being pushed down. Just almost. I'm going to increase the volume to negative 5. The drum strike is not harsh at all. There's a lot of energy when the drumstick comes down on top of the drum head and with the cymbals, but it's not ear piercing, even at negative 5 decibels. This is a pleasant bass response where it feels like you're sitting maybe second or third row from the stage and you're just listening to the drummer riff. You're still getting the energy without the harshness. The drum head, every time a drum head is hit, you can hear the reverberation. The reverberation, it lingers just slightly. No harshness, no peakiness. Okay, let's stop that. And let's switch to the 1990. All right, so I've got the 1990 on my head. Let's restart. And the volume is going to be, I'm going to keep it at negative 20 to start. Here we go. The reverberation, the decay of the drum on the 1990s is a little bit faster. I'm going to increase the volume negative 14. Definitely faster. Increase the volume negative 10. I don't hear that boing boing sound as the air is being pushed down. I heard it on the T1, not so much on the 1990. A lot of energy at the cymbal strike. Very, very energetic, and somebody might find it really painful. It's at my threshold. That energy when the drum strike is significantly more on the 1990 than it was on the T1. It sounds like, where I said the T1, it feels as if you're sitting second row or something from the stage. The 1990 at this volume makes it sound like you're sitting on the stage, maybe a couple of feet away from the drum. Good separation of each drum hit and the cymbals. Decay is faster on the 1990 than it was on the T1. Good left to right sound stage as the drummer is going left to right. Okay. So, what do I say? For this song, I would say that if you want a more... I have to be careful. I almost said visceral. It's not really visceral. If you want a more fast response rate, more energy in the drum strikes, and the 1990 is definitely the one I would suggest over the T1 on this song. If you're talking about drum solos, then the T1 has a way of rounding things off, meddling a little bit on the drum strikes, the bass frequency. That treble energy is rolled off even at very high volumes. So it doesn't get ear piercing. That's a good thing. But on the other hand, you also don't get all that energy that's part of the drum strike naturally. All right, so let's talk about conclusions. I think that between these two, there is a noticeable difference in bass response. The 1990 is a tighter headphone, meaning that it has better control in the bass frequency compared to the T1, where the T1 has this loosey-goosey presentation where the bass and the sub-bass kind of meld, and then it also starts shoving shoulders with the mids. Plus, you have the rolled off treble. You have a kind of a more pleasant experience, and pleasant for me is different pleasant from you, right? I mean, for you, you might say that you want that energy and you like that, and that's pleasant for you. So, defining the word pleasant is an individual task. But if you are treble sensitive, then the T1 is definitely the one I would recommend, because it's not going to hurt your ears. On the other hand, the other side of that is you're also not going to get that tight bass response that the 1990 provides. It's much tighter. And it appears that the 1990 has more lean bass response than the T1, where the T1 seems to have a bit more bumped up bass, though not particularly well controlled, and starts melding with the frequencies, feels a little loose. There's a bit of distortion with the mids, a bit of rubbing up shoulders. The thing that I noticed the most was with Angel, when you have the bass and you have the vocalist coming in. On the T1, it sounded like the vocalist was in line, shoulder to shoulder with the bass, and that the vocalist lost a bit of that energy, so it didn't sound as clear as it did on the 1990. Whereas with the 1990, because it has a less emphasis on the bass, the vocal came out much cleaner and clearer in comparison. And not only was it cleaner and clearer, the vocal, but the bass was faster resolving, decayed faster. And so, if you're choosing between these two, I think they're for different markets. And if you're looking for something that is for more critical listening, and you're choosing between the two, then I would say that the 1990, at least when we're talking about the bass, is probably the better way to go, because it does provide you with a little bit more bang for your buck. In other words, you get more separation, you get a better control over the bass frequency, and overall, there's no distortion with the other frequencies. Now, the T1, I'm not saying the T1 distorts the frequency. That's not what I mean. All I mean to say is that the T1 simply has a bass frequency that isn't particularly refined, right? And by refined, I mean there's no hard line separation between this is the sub bass, now we're talking about the bass, now we're talking about the mids, now we're talking about the treble. It all kind of melds just a tiny, tiny bit. And you may not be able to tell the difference unless you're doing an A and B test. You may not care. You may not think that that's an issue for you. You might find that that is absolutely a deal breaker. That's totally dependent on your preference. I hope that this has been of some help. There have been some question between these two headphones. Which one should I buy? And, totally up to you. The T1 is a good headphone. I think it's the smoothest sounding Beyerdynamic headphone I have heard to date. And it's the one that I would listen to if I want to listen to a bear, that's the one I would listen to. If I want to listen to something a bit more analytical, I have many other headphones to choose from than the 1990. The 1990 is a good headphone, very, very good. But for $600, you can do a lot better for $600. And for $100 more, you can definitely do a lot better. If you have any questions, comments, please leave them in the comment section below. If you might consider donating to me on Patreon, I would truly appreciate it. I currently have 6 wonderful, giving, amazing patrons who give a little bit of their hard-earned money every month, and I appreciate all 6 of them. If you would like to join their ranks and help support this channel, help me keep saving up money to buy more products that I can review for you and give you my honest, unhindered opinion about how I think, then please do consider donating a couple of bucks to me per month. If you are a regular viewer but you haven't subscribed, hey, maybe you'll consider subscribing because I love getting a notification every day that I've got one new subscriber. We are close to getting the 500 mark subscription, and we're, I think, 23 subscribers away from 500. So keep subscribing. Thank you so much for everyone's support. I hope all of you have a wonderful, pleasant Sunday. Take care.